Hello again. All right, the sort of point of this playlist here is to try and get some terminology, some definitions, and some um, familiarity with some terms and words and things, even some historical ideas that are probably going to be on someone's standardized test, state or otherwise, at some point in time. And I don't know exactly who, when, what, where, how, or why might be able to get to them next school year. Obviously, not this school year. Things like that. But it's just an idea to try and get some familiarity with some things and also be able to maybe just give a little extra bonus uh, time for studying. You know, a lot of times if the more something is reinforced, the more it's going to be in there. So if you hear me saying some of these terms or talking about some of these people, and then it comes up again in like a video in class or just in a reading in school or someone's talking about it, it's going to reinforce that, which is then going to make it easier to remember. And I hate teaching for tests, I really do, but it's the reality of what we live in, at least in this state of Ohio and in a lot of other places in at least the United States, not the rest of the industrialized world that said, this is not a good idea, but we're like, let's do more. So, again, this is just trying to get some familiarity in, maybe an extra study guide for things. I'm not an authority on any of this. A lot of these are going to be um, what I'm using basically is this is called The World of Ideas, Dictionary of Important Theories, Concepts, Beliefs, and Thinkers by Chris Roman. Um, and this is, there's some stuff that just kind of doesn't get covered in some of the textbooks, but might still be on a test. And and if not, again, I'm picking and choosing. I'm not going through every single tiny thing in the entire book. I'm cherry picking out other stuff from it. Not only I think might be things that might come up on a test, might also come up just in different classes. For example, I know there's going to be some Marxism in here later on. That might be something, especially with all the social justice warriors and everyone just vomiting what they think is a good idea online, knowing the difference between capitalism and Marxism and some of these other things and where they come from might be nice to know. Maybe you don't want to be an informed voter, but just knowing who you might be dealing with at a job or something else is helpful. A couple other things I want to start with, though. We live in an age where everyone, I mean, I do this too. I make them, share them sometimes. Memes. Well, memes are not originally just some, oh, well, this is some fancy computer thing that we do to make a joke and waste time. They use the name from a very specific thing. An actual meme, this is an older term, is an element of a culture or system of behavior that may be considered to be passed from one individual to another by non-genetic means, especially imitation. In other words, it's an idea. I think it was Terence McKenna that was saying, would use the definition of it's the sort of smallest part of an idea that can be communicated. So passed from one individual to another by non-genetic means. In other words, it's not an inherited trait. It's something you learn, but it's not like the entire thing of it. It's a piece of that. Again, element of culture or system of behavior, part of an idea. So a meme is like an electron is part of an atom. This is part of an idea, part of a thing that gets transmitted between people. So and that so another and another word that kind of brings in ties into this a little bit too. Again, neither of these are from this book, but also epigenetics. Those who have been in my class have heard me use that word a few times. It's the study of changes in organisms caused by the modification of gene expression rather than alteration in the code itself. So we're talking about environmental differences, the way things express, the way the genes express, and the way they interact, and the changes with that. So this isn't, it's choices, it's consistent behavior, where you are, what you're doing when you're there, things along those lines. That's changes. Again, transmitted by non-genetic means, so it's not inherited. These are things that ostensibly we have a certain amount of control over because there's a lot of environmental aspect to this. Not necessarily environmental in terms of the big environmental system of the world, but environmental of even just how we do things and where we do them and foods we choose to eat and things along those lines. So those two, they're not in the book, but I think they are important for some of the stuff that's just going on in the world now. Now, a lot of this is going to be in these first couple terms that I want to use are going to use this word, so I'm just going to define it now. Epistemology. Epistemology, again, I don't know if this is going to be on a test. It might be. I don't have my lists. I printed out lists earlier in the year and was using that in class, and I don't have them with me now. And I don't have a printer. So going back and forth between this and other things is not going to do anyone any good. But epistemology is basically studying knowledge. Ask questions about knowledge. What is it? How to know it, how to learn it, how to think it, the relations between the knower and the thing known. What are the limits? So, if I have, maybe someone has I have a certain knowledge about like Tai Chi. But that my knowledge of that is going to be influenced by the person who taught it to me, the reasons I wanted to learn it, the reasons I kept going with it for almost 21 years, the interactions I've had other people with, with other people involved with that, the research I've done and all that. And a lot of the times this also comes out, and I think one of the important things about this is also understanding the time with which things came out. We can look at a lot of things now, but back in the day, something that's, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old and look at them like, what the hell? Like, you can't do that. You can't say that. It's like, you can't, to a certain extent, you can't really judge the thing if it was almost sort of correct in its time. We might look at like a movie now. A movie and I have to remember this with some of the movies that I've seen. They're supposed to be, classic movies, and I can't stand them because it's, the people in them. There's not really like good people in them. There's no one to really kind of root for. A lot of this stuff is the people are just kind of crappy people making crappy decisions, and they know it's crappy, but they do it anyway. But, there's some of these movies like out of the 70s or something like that that everyone just loses their minds over, that being such great masterpieces. I'm like, these are crap. But to a certain extent, I'm looking through my lens of now, of having been born after those movies were made and having had life experience that have made my sort of idea of things going up and down all over the place, has changed my relation between that piece of art and the way that I view it. So some of those things have to be taken into context as well. Three main categories of obtaining this. One is inherited part of our existence, so something that's intrinsic, inborn with us. We're using our faculties of intelligence and our reason, and we create what we think is knowledge out of our own experience. So that one also goes back into sort of epigenetics as well. So, we have ways to kind of study knowledge would be to review just our natural sort of inclinations and our natural ways of thinking, our ways of being able to use reason and logic, and then look looking back on something based on previous experience. So epistemology, there we go, a study of knowledge. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more just in this one. I'm trying to try and make these not too long. So there's a different, you might hear something a priori or a posteriori. A posteriori also happens to be a very good Enigma album, but that's beside the point. So the reason why I defined epistemology first is because the way the book talks about this is central to epistemology. It was the exact thing. So there's sort of two kinds of knowledge, and that is based on the way the mind sort of comes to it. It's a before or after experience. A priori, prior, posterior, after. So a priori is before or prior to the observation or experience. So what do you know about a thing before you experience the thing? You know, I've been obsessed with Egypt since as long as I can remember. I've learned a certain amount of it from various sources: the mythology, the history, the geology, uh, the the layout of the country, names of pharaohs and time frames and things like that. So that'd be almost there. If I go to Egypt, then my knowledge of it will be different then, because I have an experience with the country and the culture and those monuments and places that I've read about and studied. That, if I'm being honest and I'm not just locking down on some sort of, you know, um, really ignorant sort of rule that a lot of things and a lot of places and people will do, that refuse to change their minds based on experience, whether this be people from religion or the scientists or other people like that. There's a lot of people all over the place, regardless of how free-minded that they say they are, will not change their perspective after an experience that they would need to take in and reform that information with. So it's, a posteriori would be the after the direct experience. They talk about a priori being the problem because it depends upon assumptions that one starts with. And you can have certain amount of sort of logical inferences. Like if I take, I got, what is it, this, my pen, I drop my pen and it hits the table at a certain speed or anything like that. I take my water bottle and, I can drop that. I can reasonably infer that when I take my remote control here, if I just drop it, it's going to fall based on my prior experiences. And I drop it and it falls, and then that's going to be, the posteriori, which is going to be then, okay, I know that this will happen now because it's after my experience. Last thing on this is they talk about the difference between analytic and synthetic statements. That's truth depending upon the meaning of terms versus requiring outside evidence. So analytic, analyzing the actual words that are said, the way things are described. So now we're starting to talk about the way language is used and the shortcomings of language to a certain extent, especially if now that there's a language difference in there. There's some languages differ very greatly in a lot of different ways. So sometimes it's the perspective of things is going to be very different on that. And then requiring outside evidence based on something is again going to change the idea of the knowledge of the thing. So that's sort of a way to understand a priori and a posteriori. I don't know if those are specifically going to be on a test, but it might be concepts that come up in certain things, especially if you're going into learning about government, civics, those sort of social studies sort of things, law, legal things might have something to do with that too. So this is a bit more of a philosophical as opposed to a legal aspect of it. But having that familiarity with it might be able to give you a more informed decision if you start hearing those terms come up in again, a more experiential reference, even instead of outside of school. You might also hear something called abstraction, which is taking big from the small, the general from the specific, or the universal from the particular. So you have some basic features and you make generalizations from them. This is, you can start getting into, I don't think anyone isn't in this day and age exposed to this at some point in time at all. We have, group A of people, maybe action group, political group, or something like that, and a few people behave a certain way, so we make an abstraction. We take that specific behavior of a few people and we make these generalizations about what all the whole group does. Abstract generally means something that isn't specific. It's a little bit more sort of, a little bit more subjective. There's objective, which is this is what it is. And, water's wet. That's an objective experience for anyone. Being able to then describe that or whether someone likes it or not is an abstract or subjective experience for this. So you have the small and you go to big. So this is also an important foundation for your maths. When you start learning that there's certain things that work together, you can start building on that. Well, if these work together, then that's going to work together too. You can, your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Well, if this concept works for these couple numbers, this concept will work for these other numbers on top of that too. So again, we're going to talk about, and when we bring it back to philosophy now, whether or not that this is a problem, that these qualities that are generalized are inherent or inborn in the thing, or are now problems with the way we communicate language. Again, language being imperfect. Our understanding of language is imperfect. Our understanding even of ourselves, let alone our understanding of other people, being imperfect. Miscommunication will happen because of that. And then being able to identify that these things are generalizations, abstractions, or these are objective reality is going to be something that's going to be important. I don't care where you are with that. I worked building sets for theater stuff. I've worked in theater. I've worked, real construction. I've worked in retail. I've worked in a restaurant. I've taught, again, Tai Chi and meditating, which is a whole other different kind of ball of wax in there. And then all the mental health and behavioral health stuff in residential, outside of residential, all this other stuff. This is always going to be something that you're going to need to pay attention to. Whether or not it's going to be on a test or not. Abstraction, sweeping generalizations, objective things that have happened, subjective interpretation of those things are always going to be things you have to pay attention to. Everyone should. I'm not just attacking one sort of person or anything. This should be something that is everyone's sort of mindful of, and that would be a very nice thing. But a lot of people aren't. So it behooves us to then, okay, the only thing out of that we can control is ourselves and our thinking. So we have to pay attention to what our thinking is, and our thoughts are, and how we respond to that. Are we responding in an emotional or knee-jerk reaction to something that happens or someone says something? Or is there now, okay, well, this person is saying that and it's stupid, but why am I going to get upset over that or anything? Are they making a sweeping generalization because I'm young or I'm old or I'm this, that, or the other? And some people, if we're dealing with, maybe some mental health things or something like that, people might not be able to not behave in the ways that they are in certain extents. So we need to be able to stop and be able to think and pay attention to that. So I'm going to stop there. Because the next sort of things, again, there's going to be an alphabetical sort of order to this. I know meme and epigenetics and epistemology are not are sort of taken out of that context a little bit. But that's just because I wanted to get that in so I could talk about these first two with a little bit more foundational work on it. So these next ones are going to be a little different. So there is going to be a certain alphabeticalness to this. Again, I'm not going over the whole book. I'm not going over every concept in it. I'm not going over every person in it. There will be some things that I will just read straight out of the book, and then like some of the other ones like this, I'm going to try and just simplify it a little bit, trim some of the fat, make it a little smoother, and do the best I can in terms of being able to talk about it in a more sort of what's the word I'm looking for on this one? There is a word that I want to use for that, and I'm blanking on it right now. I haven't had enough tea today. There's the colloquial. There it is, colloquial sort of way. Because again, some of these textbooks or philosophy books get really, when you go over 3-4 pages and it's one sentence, not just a paragraph, one sentence, and a lot of semicolons and everything like that, it starts getting kind of weighty. This doesn't really do that, but you might find that somewhere. Philosophy and law seem to have it would be very specific in those things. Okay, so that'll be it for this one right now. I don't at the moment have a name for all this, but I'm going to do a few things here and try and get the ball rolling. Again, so this is going to be a kind of a cross between some stuff you might need for classes, whether it be social studies or English language arts, history. There might even be bits that pull into ideas that go into science. I don't, no one's really have to know philosophy unless you go to college and take classes in college or university for it. But these will also be things that will help inform people in terms of behavior and understanding certain things of the world around them. So you're exposed to things you might not be exposed to otherwise. So that's it for right now, and have fun.